One of my favorite examples of when I think about art and how it can help us process emotion and get a deeper understanding of ourselves is from the famous movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And if you're not familiar with the movie, it's about three high schoolers who skip school one day. And it is about them figuring out how to really enjoy their lives. And one of them, Ferris, he's the ringleader. He's very confident. The other is his girlfriend, Sloane, and the other is his best friend, Cameron. And Cameron has a lot of anxiety. He's got a lot of fear. He's got a terrible relationship with his father. And most of the movie is just kind of lighthearted and fun. But when they go into the museum, they start looking at all these different paintings and art. And there's this one pivotal scene that to me always struck me. And that is when Cameron is alone looking at, is it George Seurat? I don't know how to pronounce his name properly. But it's his most famous painting, and it is called A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte. And he is looking at this famous painting. It's really big painting. And it shows a lot of upper class people in a park looking out at the water. And everybody is looking out at the water except one character. It's a little girl who is presumably with her mother, and she is looking out at the viewer. And Cameron is transfixed by this little girl. Like he starts looking at her, and then the camera goes straight in closer and closer and closer into her eyes. And it basically, the way John Hughes, the director, does it, it's like it alternates between his eyes and her eyes. And it starts getting closer and closer until you can't even see her anymore. She's just a bunch of pixelated pixels. And this scene is really transfixing in a scene where, in a movie where everything's just fun. And it ends up being, I think, part of his transformation, Cameron's transformation, where he starts to feel, wow, I'm just really lonely and disconnected. I have no relationship with my father. I'm scared of everything. And he's looking at this little girl, and she too is alone because everybody's looking in the one direction, and she's the only one that's looking out at him. And it's almost like he can identify with her, like with her loneliness. So I love that scene because that ends up, I think, really impacting how Cameron changes at the end and he gets the courage to face his father. But what do you think of that scene? I would just love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, if anyone here is watching and has had art history courses, you'll be familiar probably with this painting. It was really um, interesting in a lot of ways. There's a lot of references to prostitution in this piece, and the way that the technique was done, it was obviously a controversial piece, which is one of the reasons why a piece will become famous. Is a lot of people argue about if it's great or if it's terrible for certain reasons. And you could Google a little bit about this piece to learn about the specific elements. Um, but there's a technique that he used called pointillism, which is a whole bunch of little tiny dots. And so not only I think the subject matter, he's connecting with this one child in the middle who is really observing a typical scene, but is also it's that coming of age that as you lose your youth and you see how the real world is. I think that was really what struck me in particular with this scene. And all the little dots is sort of this meticulous way of really just driving that home. The scene is happening, and this artist in particular really obsessed over the texture, all those little teeny marks that he made. So getting the idea of how this piece was made and really just focusing on this character that's in the piece and connecting. I think it became this huge mind blown situation for him, um, and I think his doors really opened in that scene, and it's really powerful.
It is. And I knew it was pointillism, but I didn't know there was prostitution in there. So we should talk about that at some point because I don't think Cameron recognizes that. I did not know that. So that's really fascinating. And I don't know art history, which I think is actually one of the things that's really cool about that scene in that movie is that you can really enjoy the piece for how it speaks to you in the moment, how it just reflects certain things. And I think it's fascinating that somebody could go see that piece and not pay attention to the little girl. They could be paying attention to something else. But he was drawn to the little girl, the one that is set aside from everyone else, because everyone else is looking in the same direction and she looks lost and alone. And she's holding hands with her mother, who isn't paying attention to her in the same way his father is not paying attention to him. And I did read somewhere, like John Hughes said, that part of the reason he focuses on the pointillism, it's almost like she doesn't even exist at a certain point. She's faceless, and he can identify that with that sense of like, I don't belong anywhere. I am nothing. And he kind of has to dig himself out of that by the end of the movie. So I just love that scene as an example of how we can find art and have it really speak to who we are emotionally, that we may not necessarily know the origin of the art, why it was created the way it was, and we can learn that, but that there's something about art that can just capture us and help us understand our own emotions better and even release whatever pain we might have.
Yes. So in terms of art, Susie, and stress, do you have any recommendations for our viewers today, or what's any other thoughts that you would like to leave us with?
I think the main thing is that we have more than one way of interacting with the world. And we definitely have an intellectual way that we can look and understand the history of art, why it's the way it is. It can help us appreciate it. So, in a way, that's kind of like our mind, our intellect. But there's also the body, that there is something about simply turning off your brain for a moment and simply connecting with art or with a tree or with something in your environment, that when you can get present to it without the brain sitting there trying to interpret it all the time, that's when you have the most access to transforming your own emotions and understanding yourself. And so I just wanted to offer that it's not just about art and it is about everything, but that when you can be really present and pay attention, that's when things shift for you. So whether it's with art, where you know who the artist is, or you don't, you can actually shift that.
Yeah. It's like time melts away. Sometimes you're just swimming in it and you're
Yes,
for it, and it gives your brain pause to
it
make.
does. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about looking at art is that we can have the intellectual brain trying to make sense of it and then just allowing the body to absorb it,
Yes.
just writing it out. And that is, I think, where the beauty of any kind of art can really help us transform our own relationship to ourselves, to our emotions, to our understanding. I do think that, for example, if you read a poem or you look at some other kind of piece of artwork, fiction, etc., that's basically why it exists. It's like it helps us understand others, but also ourselves when we just allow it. And I think that's exactly what we can get out of art by just being present to it.